Agenda is review. The main item on the agenda is reviewing the agenda for the February 2nd board meeting. And starting with the big items, page 7. We don't have any rules going, but there is one public hearing, which is on the back guidelines. Matt, Al, give a quick update.
Thanks, Phil. Al Bias, Program Supervisor of the BACT Group. This year, we're once again updating the BACT guidelines, the best available control technology guidelines, by updating both the major source and minor source determinations. We are targeting the food ovens, flares, and furnace heating for major source, and for minor source, we're including determinations for food ovens again, and updating the engines, both portable and stationary engine categories. And also for the printing and graphic arts, we are including the option to use ultraviolet electron beam curable coatings as an option for compliance with VAC. And at the Station Resource Committee, there's no opposition. We got full support. And this is, once again, our periodic update to the guidelines, as we do, try to do at least every year. As new technologies are identified, that we list and update our guidelines. That's
Questions? Mark?
Just a couple of comments, and I know Dr. Liu had some concerns at the committee meeting, and let me just make an observation that companies that invest in new technologies rely on the ability to get back determinations fairly quickly. Otherwise, in the marketplace, they're dead. They put a lot of resources into it. So I've had some clients in the past that have had problems with that, and this is going back years. So I just wanted to comment that it's important that as things are out there in the field and they're demonstrated and they show compliance over the 6 months that the district asks for in regular operation, that they quickly get moved over. And that's one part of it, is the folks that invest in these technologies. But the other little piece is that when a piece of equipment gets permitted, it's going to be there for quite a number of years. And we don't generally, for new innovative stuff or for back stuff, we don't always go back because it's expensive to go back and pass source-specific rules on them. So those things are going to be around for a while. So it works to the benefit of those that have existing sources to not have additional burden on them through tougher source-specific rules, but also it's important from an air quality standpoint that we get these things out there early, because then we can start getting those reductions, or at least not greater emissions to start with.
Yeah, that's our focus. And in fact, for the 6 months operational time, that applies only to major sources. For minor sources, we have a 1-year operational criteria. So, and we are constantly looking at the technologies, and as soon as they meet the minimum criteria for either major source or minor source, which is a more rigorous requirement, we identify them and bring them to the VAC Scientific Review Committee and to the board.
Well, I think Dr. Liu had some concerns that wasn't the case for all those technologies that were being put into the emerging technologies. And you've got other things in those emerging technologies, zero emission technologies like electrification, that could easily go in there as back, and we could have a number of new sources out there that, instead of having combustion sources that might emit significantly more, could get us down to zero quicker.
In that case, the one quick caveat was that cost effectiveness, that was a limitation for us moving a lot of that technology over. But for major sources, we're looking at, for example, the fuel cell that was installed at Riverside operating on biogas. That is a technology that almost achieving the 1-year anniversary for the operational. So at this point, since it has not achieved its first year operational criteria, we placed it in our emerging technologies. But at the next update of the DAC guidelines, we're looking to moving that technology up to actual full proposal for layered determination.
Of course, the fuel cell itself is not, there's no need for a source test. It's the heater on there, which is pretty much off-the-shelf technology. So, I mean, the need to wait or the need to wait on things that are already in those emerging technology guidelines could be moved quicker in there. And I know there's a lot of resistance from some folks that don't want to use those technologies, but that's kind of the requirements in state law internally and federal law. For
earlier, that we're looking at having that as a specific case for any future fuel cells that are going to be deployed using biogas. That will be the standard for BAC. But we can't say BAC fuel cells are DG for everything.
But you could say electric engines for some categories also, as opposed to.
BAC requires the technology, we have a permit before we can establish the BAC. Electric engines don't require permits, so we can't place, that'd be like a rule, more like a rule type.
Yeah, they said.
Yeah.
If that's preventing it in permit determinations, then I think the district needs to take another
Electric
look.
engines though, motors.
Isn't it the order? Isn't it the R example?
Yeah, electric motors are exempt from permits, which is that, we don't have BAC information.
So that's not, yeah, that's not a back, but we can promote it other ways, right?
Yeah.
Because it has to be through back.
Well, that's one way of doing it, and if it's not getting it through our back rules, then maybe we need to look at some changes.
I think it's in the AQP under control, right, for stationary source.
Yeah.
CMBO2.
Anyway, I just wanted to
Thank you.
make those comments, both from the technology standpoint of companies, because in many cases, investment really dries up quickly when the district doesn't go ahead and do those determinations. And I've had clients that have thrown in the towel.
Any other questions on this item?
Just an aside, since you brought it up, isn't the Riverside fuel cell with biogas a problem because the gas isn't clean enough and the fuel cells
In
are the
fact,
problems?
this is, we consider our poster child of a site. They're doing everything the right past deployments of fuel cells on biogas or digester gas have had issues. This time.
Is that because the gas not clean enough?
That is very sensitive. Fuel cell is very sensitive to the sulfur actually in the gas. Sulfur can poison the catalyst in the fuel cell. This deployment has a very specialized biogas treatment technology, which is what has a permit from the biogas treatment. And it's such to the point that it brings it down to the parts per billion level to make sure that there's no poisoning of the catalyst in the fuel cell. And it's been operating at 100% biogas almost a year.
Oh, is that the wastewater treatment facility?
Yes, that's right.
Question, Rita's not here, does that mean we're good?
That's not here?
Rita's not here, so
Oh.
does that mean we're good?
She supported the item.
Yeah, she was supportive for the most part.
She was complimentary, actually.
Okay, so if that's it on item 29, as long as we're on the last page, I know these aren't public hearings, but there are two larger items on the page. So if we go to item 27, I'll tee it up for, I don't know if Jason's here, but Matt can maybe handle. But we've got a lot of questions recently at various committees about how all these pieces of all these monitoring efforts that are occurring, the MATE study, just passed Rule 1180, AB 1647, AB 617, our AQ spec program, how all these things fit together. And we're trying to provide just an informational presentation on how we view it all fitting together and how they all are complementary. But I'll let Matt, want to give any more detail or just answer
Yeah,
questions?
so what Jason is gonna do is put into context, as Phil said, all the different technologies and how the board has funded things under different programs, but they really fit under this overarching umbrella of how do we get these advanced technologies to meet the requirements of these multiple goals, for MATES, AB 617, or toxics program, refinery monitoring. So all of that, he'll talk about the optical remote sensing, the low-cost sensors, and how those all fit. So trying to give a broader perspective to the board on all these different activities and what the main goals are. But, essentially, they are going to kind of all marry up to what we're doing under 617 community monitoring. So you've been hearing kind of disparate board actions to fund these things. This should hopefully kind of stitch them all together.
Any questions for Matt? Okay, number 28 is our NSR status report.
It's a routine item, and the report shows that preliminarily we are at equivalency with federal and social security requirements. Everything looks good. No red flags.
You got kicked off the table?
We didn't want to.
Much better angle, to alter.
Naveen, move that last chair out.
Okay, any other questions for Lockie? Then we'll go back to the beginning of the agenda on page 2. First item is the minutes. Second item, I don't know if you have it yet, but we're setting hearing on Rule 1111. We did go to committee. I think we're on track for that. There's obviously different manufacturers of these furnaces are in different stages of developing compliant furnaces. So we're trying to balance, those that have compliant furnaces or soon to have compliant furnaces with the need to have some consumer choice. And I think we've landed in a good spot. It doesn't mean everybody's happy, but we're still working with them, and there's still minor modifications that we can make. But the committee, Stationary Source Committee, was pretty supportive of the approach that we've taken thus far. Any questions on that?
I just recall the one contractor who had the big inventory, and
Is that
you guys were, pardon?
Howard Industries?
Is that it?
Yeah, so there's one.
Because you guys were saying that 15 months is probably enough to.
Yeah, so there's one distributor that works only with one supplier, one manufacturer. So their concerns are that, I think their main concern is they're hoping that their supplier actually has a compliant unit somewhere in this period, which.
Well, they've still got that inventory stacked up.
Yeah, so we believe they will. I mean, we can't really reveal confidential information about their development, where they are in the development, but it seems like they're moving in that direction. They have other concerns about the mitigation fee and whether that's going to be competitive or not, but they're really in the same boat as any other distributor that doesn't have is still selling non-compliant products. The mitigation fees will even that out. So we've talked to them about that concern, and their last concern is inventory. They are going to have 15 months to manage their inventory. They know when that'll phase out. We're still talking to them if there's anything else we can do, but it does seem like they know what that end date is, and their supplier knows when the compliant unit will be available, that there's time there to manage and not be left holding too much. So we're still willing to talk with them though. Any other questions? All right, we'll move on to page 3. Matt has a couple items. I'll start with item 3.
So the first item is to co-fund a project in Port of Long Beach. They received a large grant from the California Air Resources Board for doing zero-emission cargo handling equipment, and they've asked us to participate by co-funding. They're getting, I think it's $5.3 million. Compare electric top picks and also a fuel cell and battery electric yard hostler. So they're asking for us to cost share $350, but the total project is $8.3 million, which is a modest amount. Any questions?
Just a comment, I didn't get to see it. Port of Long Beach had their state of the port thing yesterday. It's online. I just caught the tail end of it. And they were making a big deal about going zero emission. But it's online. It's on, I haven't had a chance to watch the whole thing, but I caught the end of it and they were making a big deal about the zero emission thing.
Good, we just gotta get them to hurry up, move forward quicker. The next item is renewing our membership of the Fuel Cell Partnership. This is the industry, government, public-private partnership to accelerate the deployment of zero-emission fuel cell vehicles throughout California. We are an executive member, so we're paying $70,000 membership fee that puts us on the board. Dr. Parker was the chair last year. The chair rotates every year. So we are proposing to continue our membership. We also pay half of the salary for a full-time fuel cell partnership staff to be in the Southern California region to promote fuel cells in our area. We're also additionally requesting funding to the fuel cell partnership continue their medium and heavy duty work. So they started that work to see how medium and heavy duty technologies could utilize fuel cells because they've restructured their membership dues. There was a shortfall this year, so they were going to cut that portion out of their scope. But Toyota and us, as well as EPA and others, want them to continue that work. So we're co-funding it with Toyota to continue the medium and heavy duty technologies work at the fuel cell partnership. So the total cost is $245,000, but $120 is for the membership, the staff member, and then $125 for the medium and heavy duty work.
I know my board member raised this issue, but the Bay Area is paying the other $50,000?
No, there was a misunderstanding there. They are a member, but they're not paying for the staff specifically.
They're not $70,000.
They're not the executive board member.
We're the only air district that is into that situation.
And we have been historically. But that, I think that's a testament to the leadership of the board that we need to ensure that zero emission technologies has major penetration in both the light duty and the heavy duty market.
We've had significant successes, like you just said. We've been able to help direct the direction of that forward and the focus, medium, heavy duty.
Yeah, one of the reason we pay for not only an executive board seat, but also some of their staff time is because, as you exactly what you're saying, Jacob, originally they weren't targeting Southern California for whatever reason. It was all based in Sacramento. So we said, no, the market is in Southern California, and over the past 10 years, we've been shown to be accurate. The market is expanding here more than in the Bay Area and Sacramento, and most of the cars are deployed here. So yeah, had we not been actively pushing them, there would be a lot, probably less activity in the Southern California area.
There's been a huge difference since during the times when they've had a staff person down here and we've been funding it. If you look at the quarterly reports that we see all the time, there are all sorts of activities down here. And I would say that the importance of those activities actually exceeds the stuff that I saw happening in the Bay Area with their stuff. And in particular, I also noticed they've done a lot of educational stuff with respect to permitting of the fueling stations. And that has been critical for getting those stations up and operating in a fairly quick time frame.
And I would just add that when you look at the collaborative and the partnership, and it was the collaborative that I was referring to when Mayor McAllen was asking where Bay Area is funding 50% of their executive director, and they're at the same level as we are. But it really is that leadership perspective that you're hearing about. And I think had we not been in that position, Toyota and we would not be at the forefront of fuel cell deployment and hydrogen refueling in the ports. And that's going to be important for a number of other issues that we're looking at.
Any other questions on the system part? The next item is we're actually recognizing funds. So I think part of the board's mission or direction for us when we established the AQ SPEC program, the Air Quality Sensor Performance Evaluation Center, was to go out and find extramural funding. So this is one of those efforts where we're partnering with a company. They won a DOE award, and they want to develop a indoor air quality protocol. And so they're using AQ SPEC, our sensors, and our staff to help develop that protocol. And so we're recognizing funding. They're paying us for that. So we're recognizing funding $56,000 to help them develop that protocol.
Questions?
So if there's any questions, that would move to page 4. The top of the page is item 6. This is somewhat routine item where we're recognizing monies from the US EPA to fund our protocol assessment system, our network rather. So we're recognizing funds, and then we're issuing RFQs to purchase equipment for our monitoring network.
Any change in where these are being deployed? Anything's interesting with them?
No.
Well, the PAMS program has been trying for a long time to update the requirements for the equipment. So used pretty much in the past, all the samples, this is measuring VOCs that are precursors to ozone. It's kind of a scientific program. So all of the samples had to go back to the lab and be analyzed, and they've been pushing for years to go to continuous instruments. So we're trying to be kind of one of the early adopters of the newer technology.
So you don't have to send the tech out in the field to.
Yeah, we've had for years continuous instruments in the field, but they're basically lab instruments that kind of have been adapted for the field, and they're really clunky to run, and there's some newer stuff out there.
Item 7, this is another routine item. I'll just do this quick, it'll be quick. We typically go out every 2 to 3 years to request RFQs for technical assistance for all of our technology advancement projects. So that's incentives and demonstrations. And it's good to have experts or additional administrative staff on hand to help us with large programs. So this is just asking for qualifications from those consulting firms to help us in these different areas, and then we'll come back to the committee with recommended selections.
Questions on that? All right, I think I saw Derek, number 8.
Great. This item is to authorize funding for 2 senior air conferences. We have one in 2011, another one in 2012. This item is, we're going to have 2 conferences, anticipating over 3,000 seniors. This event has been very successful in the past, so we want to continue that about educating seniors on the impacts of for air quality and what they need to do now in the air. Any questions?
Where do you, for the seniors, sometimes it's difficult for them to get around. So do you go to the senior centers or you?
So what we do is we do the outreach to the senior centers, but we actually provide the buses from the senior centers to the events. We also provide them lunch. We're going to try to get some co-sponsors to help to free the cost, but it's actually really successful. I already got one, probably going to put $10,000 into it. Karen Moore/Anthem, they're interested in it, so it reaches their target audience. There's going to be a lot of sponsors that kind of want to reach this target audience also.
Do you have locations?
So right now we have the first one is going to be in LA County, tentatively going to be at the LA Convention Center. We're just going through the contract process right now, but it's pretty much secure. The other one, we haven't identified the other location. It'll be in the Inland Empire or Orange County, I'm not sure.
Any other questions on 8? Ron, number 9.
Good morning. I have the next 3 items. The first item, we established a list from RFQ of pre-qualified vendors to provide smaller technologies needed to support the day-to-day needs such as printers, laptops, hardware, software, and audiovisual equipment. As a result, we identified 12 vendors to provide these products over a 2-year period, and this action is to approve the 12 vendors. The funds are already in our budget. I'm happy to answer questions. And item number 10. This is an action to execute a contract with Digital Network Group Incorporated to upgrade the fiber network in our building. The current fiber network is over 20 years old and needs to be replaced. We conducted a competitive bid process via an RFP. The funds for this project are included in our budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions. And item number 11. This last item is to authorize the purchase of a server and storage maintenance contract with Hewlett Packard Company for 1 year. This is an annual request, and the funds for this project are included in our budget, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
The last item is approve contracts for the MSRC. As you know, that's a body made up of government agencies that we get discretionary 2766 funds. The AQMD just administers contracts for them. So this is, they make the decision on the contracts, they release an RFQ, and these are just doing about 8 different contracts in that work program. Most of it is for infrastructure, so EVSE and natural gas infrastructure.
Any questions on 12? All right, so that brings us to the reports. So items 13 through 18. Any questions on any of the reports?
Anything interesting on the rural forecast? Since I have to ask that question every month.
Yeah, no major changes except, as you've heard, the effort on 408 and 120, there were a lot of requests to kind of go through a more, we had viewed those as kind of administrative rules, but we have some stakeholders who don't view it that way, so we're gonna have
That's the credible evidence.
credible evidence and circumvention. So we're gonna have, 1 or 2 working group meetings and work through some of the issues before we bring them back. I think we're gonna try to, we move them to April. I think those are the only changes that you'll see on that. Any other questions on reports or the rural forecast? All right, I know you don't have a lot of the committee reports yet. Any questions on?
I didn't drive to Torrance on Saturday morning for some reason. Can sort of let us know what happened. I mean, the hundreds of emails that they're pouring into our inbox changed a little bit after the Saturday meeting. So could just
I'll go ahead and give you my overview. We had about 400 and some odd people overall in attendance.
I was close. I was guessing 200 refinery workers and 200 community members. That was my guess. So
Yeah, it was probably around that. It was, it was a good turnout. The presentation was very brief, sort of an overview in terms of staff presentation. In terms of what's happened in the past, the refinery committee meeting that we held last year, and then we presented our staff recommendations with regard to moving forward on 1410. So it's a tier-based approach, and Phil, I'll let you explain that.
Yeah, so we've been looking at obviously the effectiveness of modified HF as well as the feasibility of phase outs. So what staff presented was basically rule concepts, and the concepts were a tiered mitigation approach, like some things that could be done to safety measures in case of accident that could be done relatively quickly in the 6 to 12 month time frame. Another set that maybe 2 to 3 years, 4 years, and then finally about 8 years out, the facilities would have a choice to either go to an alternative that does not involve HF or modified HF, or do something that we acknowledge has not been done before, but some kind of quote fail-safe, you can never be fail-safe, type of enclosure, similarly along the lines of what others have done for like chlorine gas transfer or, some very hazardous waste sites. We can almost talk about the nuclear industry and what they go through in terms of protections and safety. So we had that option out there, and as an alternative, because we had heard not just from the refineries but also the community, it's like is there a mitigation that could be considered like absolutely safe? So we floated that idea. It didn't seem like the refineries really were that excited about it. Didn't seem like the community was that excited about it either. but it's still on the table, something we'll be discussing.
So some kind of bulletproof.
Yeah.
Nuclear dome.
Well, a number of chemical facilities will have chlorine tanker car deliveries. And what a number of those facilities, at least in my experience, have done is build full enclosures. You'll have a roll-up door, the tanker car goes in, roll-up door closes, and then they have transfer equipment. But in conjunction with the transfer equipment, they also have, in essence, a decontamination. So if there's ever release, they're hooked up to scrubbers. So they'll have like 3 times volume in reserve. So like for chlorine, I think a lot of times they'll use like a potassium phosphate or some other salt solution. They'll just completely inundate that area. And like I said, I know a number in the chemical companies utilize that technology. So the thought was, could you do a full enclosure of the alkylation unit or the HF storage tanks? And so whether that's a full enclosure around the entire unit, whether the storage tanks are moved underground, something that at least in the petro refining we're not aware of. You know, Anna, you might have some.
It's not.
Yeah.
It's not. You don't enclose things, usually. It depends. I mean, you could have, like, if you're close to a community or something, you know, you might have a blast wall, and that's like a super thick, you know, concrete wall with reinforcements and stuff. But you typically, you wouldn't box in a unit, a refinery. For example, in Alaska, because it's so cold, everything's built on modulars, so everything is enclosed. But that's a little different.
Right.
I mean, and then especially if this is an existing facility, then it makes it just a little bit more challenging to enclose something, because you just don't have the product of HF or the alkylation processing, but you also have other products that come into the unit, like water or steam or whatnot. Then what do? You have a wall, and then you protrude through that wall, and then how do you make sure that whatever you're protruding in, you know, what do you cover it with? I mean, it's just something to think about. You know?
So I think the refineries were of the mindset, we don't know we like that idea. We like the first 2 levels of mitigation, but anything beyond that we're not very pleased about. And I would say that at the end of the day, the direction from the board was to staff, go back to the refineries, and actually they said this directly to the refineries as well. You need to work with staff and come up with a consensus approach, because if you can't get a consensus approach, then we're going to make the decision, and we'll make the recommendation to the board, and you probably won't like it. So I think the refiners heard that loud and clear. We're setting up meetings. I know I'll be meeting tomorrow. We'll be meeting tomorrow with PBF. And we'll be meeting with Valero, and we'll be continuing the work to try to get to that consensus.
So
The directive, though, was within 75 days to come back to the committee.
So improved and enhanced mitigation and safety, and then phase out is like down the road if.
That was the tiered approach, right? Install what you can right away. So whether that's water cannons, water curtain, whether it's the laser detection system, whether it's the paints, just make sure everybody has what we know is out there. And then the next level was based on recommendations from the American Petroleum Institute of other additional mitigation measures. And those, I would say, were probably lukewarm. If that was all they had to do, they might accept that. But the feel, if you will, of the community and from what we saw of the committee was they want to move toward the phase out. And so what is the best way to do that when the technology demonstrations that have been done thus far either haven't been at the same scale or they haven't been at the duration that would lead to the confidence that this would be a worthwhile investment. So part of the mitigation approach is to move forward in a way that as they are implementing those various tiers, we would also be looking at the technology. And so that's where I think, you know, we're trying to walk that fine line between what we understand from a technical perspective with regards to HF and its control, and with regards to some of the community and some of the other concerns about the overall safety aspects.
Some of the refinery committee members were clear that our 8-year time frame was
Too long.
too long and we should try to shorten it. Staff's thinking was, if it's shortened, you're probably pushing them into a sulfuric acid change, and we wanted to allow a little more time to at least open the door to some of the other alternatives. But it's still something we need to work on with the refineries.
So just sort of the chemical issues, sulfuric acid stays a liquid, it's always a liquid. If you
Most.
have an accident, there's some emissions, but
Yeah.
HF
Boiling
is
point
semi-gaseous and creeps
Yeah.
along the ground.
If we pour HF on the table at this temperature,
On
most of it's
normal
gonna
day.
evaporate.
Gotcha.
67 degrees versus 550 something.
Yeah, although the modification, depending on how much they add, brings that up a few degrees, maybe up to 70, 80 degrees, but still on a hot day.
And that point that Phil just made is one of the key strategies that we're trying to look at, and that is, what's the real percentage that you're actually increasing the safety? Is it 10%? Is it 30%? Is it 50%? Is it 80%? You know, at the end of the day, even a 10% overall reduction, given the extent that you could have, is that really an argument that you want to be doing? One of the other comments I know that we received was, when you look at the worst case scenario, and that's what everybody points to, the worst case scenario, hundreds of thousands of people could be affected. And everybody says, well, you shouldn't be looking at the worst case scenario. Even the EPA says don't look at the worst case scenario. But when you look at a more likely scenario, you still have deaths.
Like 300 people affected.
And I think, as both the chairman, Dr. Burke, and the chairman, Dr. Parker, have said, 300 deaths, 20 deaths, 1 death is too much. So we're trying to just move past the, oh great, you got a 30% improvement. Oh great, it's a 50%. Let's go to a different technology. So that's sort of the strategy, at least from what we've taken.
So we saw from Elmer Suji's bill the pushback on the modified hydrofluoric acid, and there's a lot of industries that use this chemical. So is this the beginning? We look at the refineries, then we start looking at the aerospace industry and other companies, and how do they deal with it? How do they enclose it? What's there? And then we've talked about chlorine. So just as the industry's met with us, the refiners need to do something, and we hope that they come up with consensus. We have 3 refineries in our backyard, and just in our council district, let alone the county. But so we deal with this, a variety of different issues every day. But so Boeing's called me and said, hey, so are we next? Yeah, I mean, so.
Do they have 50,000 gallons?
I know there's quantity differences, but it's still, I mean.
And the temperature,
The temperature, the change, and.
It's not the same. The quantities are lower. Susan can weigh in here. When we first went through this, 14, 10, 20 years ago, I think it included one other non-refinery
HSC,
facility.
yeah.
It was Allied Signal. They're no longer
That's a good enough.
operating,
Yeah,
so it really, if you were just going to focus on the big risk and the larger facilities, it would be the 2 refineries. Obviously, HF is used in smaller amounts in different industries, but it's by no means the risk that is posed by a major accident at a big refinery. Again, based on
different, but just, they
quantity,
call them that, I was like,
pressures, temperatures, all those things, right?
hopefully you guys come to consensus soon. And
So I kind of wonder if there's lots of bad stuff around. There's chlorine at every wastewater treatment plant and ammonia, but probably not in those quantities.
Well, I mean, and there's safeguards for a lot of that as well.
And we all drive cars every day, which is the most dangerous thing we do. Don't smoke.
So as Wayne was saying, if you give the refiner, say PBF, if you give them full credit for what they say MHF does with all the uncertainties, and you give them full credit for all their other mitigation with all the uncertainties, they will tell you they get about an 89% benefit from all their mitigation. So you still have 11% of what would happen if it was pure HF without mitigation, if there was an accident.
Still very bad.
It's a lot.
Gotcha.
So we have 75 days to get the refiners to agree to phase out HF. No, just kidding. To come to some kind of consensus.
And this is still due for
July.
was it?
So we'll, yeah. schedule, obviously, we're gonna work hard to get back to committee in 75 days or sooner. If there's an impasse or we don't come to agreement, we might as well come back earlier.
So 75 days is mid-April?
Yeah, well,
It's around April.
That's what's a
end
committee,
of March.
committee then board.
It's gonna go in April. Right, it's probably by the location, but it's gonna be April.
Hoping it's not during spring break. But then, but we also have to get started with our SQL analysis. So we may be working on rule language to get our SQL analysis rolling, even though it may not be the final rule language.
Any other questions on 1410 refinery committee?
Okay, anything else on the reports from the other committees? So I think that brings us to.
Oh, do we have a place for mobile
So,
this
the
month,
idea
next
is-
month? Since that'll be a big one?
So we're gonna start half an hour early at 8:30 instead of 9, which will give us 2 hours. And did we ever?
The venue?
We're thinking we may hold it in GB. Did we get that?
I'm sorry, what's the question?
Oh, just all the facility-based managers are gonna go to mobile source. So each of the 5 groups has
Oh, okay.
10, 15, 20 people who are interested,
This
so.
room's gonna be tough. So we're looking for another room, but we talked to the chair and hoping to keep it on the same schedule, just start early.
So GB or maybe the auditorium.
Or here with overflow, we're still working it out.
It'd be pretty cramped in here.
The Marriott.
Yeah, it's Doubletree in Ontario.
Okay, so back to this committee's agenda. Any public comment? Is the public on this item? Any other business?
Listen, one thing. Isn't today the last board consultants briefing before we lose Kurt?
Yeah, this is my
Yes, it is.
board assistance briefing.
So I just wanted to say something about this guy that just bailed on us.
After how many years?
29.
I remember, I was on the hearing board when Kurt started, and I remember his first day appearing. He came in with a bunch of other green attorneys that were like green before the hearing board, and we kind of educated them all about how to do things appropriately before us. Kurt, on a few times, was very upset at me. Got into trouble a few times. I'll remind you later about. But it's like interesting through the years. You see these folks, and they come in new, and then like before you know it, it's time to go. And I remember just about a month ago when the board was possibly stepping into territory it shouldn't be stepping into, and Kurt kind of walked up to the dais, whispered in the chair's ear, and I just thought to myself, it's so good when you've got the agency having advice and counsel from somebody, and you know that things are just going to kind of go smoothly, relatively speaking, that you're not going to get into trouble. And then a week later, I hear he's leaving. So, so I just wanted to congratulate Kurt on just a fine few years here that he's had the district, and he's really done a great job. And who knows, maybe he'll do what some of the other district councils have done in the past and decide, well, the district's really a finer place than retirement.
Well, thank
Anyway,
you, Mark.
thanks, Kurt.
Thank you. I mean, that's very kind of you to say. And I have to say, I really have enjoyed working with this group, with all of you. I mean, just amazed by the dedication that you bring to the job. And I think it really elevates the work that the whole agency does. So thanks for the opportunity to work with
So
you
you're
all.
retiring? Is
I
that-
am, yeah, the middle of next month.
Get your speakership right behind you.
Any other business anyone wants to bring up?
Just a comment, Huffington Post had a big package on air quality I saw on the website yesterday. They had at least 3 stories. One was about the international problems, in Pakistan and China and all that.
I saw that one.
And then they had a story about a neighborhood in Orlando that's surrounded by freeways. And it's a historic African-American community, and I didn't read through the whole story, but it was kind of interesting. One hopeful thing was the map of deaths per 100,000. The US looked pretty good, even our neighborhood. It's always the one dark spot on the US besides Houston, so.
We'll take a look at that. I did see the one on the international deaths from air pollution.
Yeah, I just glanced at it real
Pakistan.
quick. I haven't read through them yet.
Any other business? Sometimes I ask, if there's a special topic we want to bring to the committee, but I think with the rule calendar, after this month, you'll start seeing there's be plenty to discuss as we come to this committee, as we're setting hearing and having public hearings. But okay, if there's no other business, no other public comment, we'll adjourn.